Awesome. Kind of worked out because I couldn't hear anybody, so I apologize for the technical difficulty. All right, so we're recording. We're going to check out the knowledge check in just a moment. What else did I miss, class? Can you bring me up to date?
I don't think anyone asked anything, to be honest.
Okay, it was just those couple of comments.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra. Appreciate it. All right, thank you all. Took me a few minutes to figure that out. I apologize for that mix up on the audio on my end. Well, let's take a look at the week 2 module, and I think I'll be able to answer Joshua's question about what the knowledge check involves. So let me start there. We're going to go to our class. If we go to modules, we're going to go to week 2. Earlier, I was talking about the history essay module, so I will go back and revisit that with you all in just a moment. And this, I talked a little bit about this in the overview video that I posted in announcements. And so if you need to refer to that, quicker than when I post up this meeting, you can also do that as well. But we're taking a look at chapter 2, which is early globalization, the Atlantic world. And generally for each module, you'll notice that I have just like a general overview here, like an introduction. Sometimes it'll be a little longer, sometimes it'll be a little brief, but it does have the objectives for the week. So the objective of applying knowledge gained from week 1 and week 2 modules by completing a formative assessment. This is what you're going to do for our knowledge check assignment. And it's 50 points. At the beginning of the knowledge check, there's a description. So it's due by Tuesday of next week. I gave you a little bit of extra, or like a day or so, or a couple of days extra, just because of the holiday weekend. I want you to have some time to enjoy yourself, especially on Monday is the holiday. So that's a day that you'll want to just relax and chill. Or if you've already done that, then you can complete the quiz that day. You still have until the end of the day, Tuesday. So I think you will have adequate time to complete the knowledge check.
Wait, so you're saying the knowledge check is due next Tuesday?
It just opened up on Wednesday, and usually I think in the syllabus, I put that it would close on Sunday. So that's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That's about 5 days, right, to complete it. And the reason why I open it up on Wednesday is because I want you to be able to read the chapters and focus on that, as opposed to like digging into the knowledge check. I want to give you the opportunity to try to focus on that as opposed to opening it and trying to get it started. But for this week, it is up until the end of the day, Tuesday. And you can still submit it after that. It'll just be considered a late assignment. But if you submit it by Tuesday, the end of the day, you're on time. And the reason why I elected to do that was so that you could have a little time to chill and relax on Monday, which is Labor Day, or before or after that, however you want to schedule your time.
Right, and cool, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So this is going to, Joshua asked earlier if it was, where you select the answers, or is you going to have to write something? It's going to be a combination of both. There's 15 multiple choice questions. Those are 2 points each, and that's 30 points possible. And then there's 2 short answer questions worth 10 points each. And so it will be both a combination of multiple choice and short answer. For the short answer portion, I'd like you to write 6 sentences or more for each of the questions. And I've shared the questions with you in the module, and I'll show you those right in just a moment. But for those of you who have already browsed through the module, you probably saw the questions. Has anybody watched or began watching the videos for this week's module? Or have you seen those just browsing through the module?
Yes, I've seen them.
Okay, cool. And those are focusing on some of the stuff that we're talking about this week. So I'll visit that with you all in just a moment. Is there a time limit or anything else? You're going to select the best answer as it pertains to each question. With this knowledge check and all future like tests or quizzes, assignments, if you spot anything that's a discrepancy, please message me and I'll make sure to check it out. You can take it up to 2 times and then your highest score will be recorded. Now, this is one more scenario just in case. Say you did really well on the multiple choice and then you didn't do well on the short answer. You can actually submit that quiz. You can go back and just do the short answer and then message me and say, hey, professor, can you combine my scores? I know on the first one I did super good with the multiple choice, but I didn't do well the short answer. On the second attempt, I did well on the short answer. I didn't do the multiple choice that well. Can you just combine those? And I'll do that. That's not a problem. Does that make sense? So there's a couple different ways you can get that high score. If you have any questions, just message me. But I have to say for instance, let's just say Sandra messages me and she says, I did super good on the multiple choice, but when I got to the short answer, I didn't get a chance to finish or something happened. Then I would ask Sandra, just go back into the quiz. You have a second attempt. Just submit the short answer and then I'll score that and then I'll combine it with your first score. So if I'm confusing you more, then don't worry about it. Just take the knowledge check as best as possible and then message me with any questions. If I notice anything out of order, I'll check in with you as well. I just mentioned that because I've had some students run into that scenario. So let's go back and take a look at the short answer questions, right? Those are going to be what you're interested in.
Have you been showing us your screen? I'm sorry. Like,
yes.
Were you sharing your screen? Okay. Well, I think I'm stuck actually on the PowerPoint. I was wondering if you were sharing it or not.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the questions that I was mentioning to you all right now, which is just like covering the details of the knowledge check. And that's listed. You should be able to view that description without even opening the knowledge check. So you can always reference this. I try to set that up so it answers any questions you have before you take the quiz. And then you should also see this highlighted information as well before you even access or open up the knowledge check. And the videos that I mentioned earlier, I think Josh had mentioned he saw the videos and the information. The short answer questions for the knowledge check this week are based off of these videos. So my suggestion is you're going to want to watch these videos prior to taking the knowledge check so you can have a reference point and you can use the information in the videos. I provided introduction and like explanation for each video. Hold on just a second. What's up, Papa? Come say hi. Give me 1 second, everybody. What's up? Lo que sea. No, esta no esta. Esta. Cierra la puerta. All right, thank you. The first video is in the explanation introduction for the video I just mentioned. It's like a little dated. You'll notice. I mean, you could kind of even tell probably by the cover, the little thumbnail. But I think it just does a good job of providing a really good overview. The second video talks about Columbus, and the 2 questions that you're focused on are the ones that are highlighted here. Does everybody see that question? Question number 1. So I think you should definitely be able to come up with at least 6 sentences for this first question. I mean, that's one that you could probably write your whole essay on, really, but you don't have to talk about each of these groups per se, but I just kind of wanted you to note the differences here. So in the week 2 overview video I did earlier in the week, I just mentioned one right off the bat. The first difference you can note is the geographical locations. So where are some of these groups located? From either your reading of the textbook or your prior knowledge, where are some of these groups located in the Americas? And you can either unmute yourself or you can share in the chat and just let us know where. The Olmec, the Aztec, the Inca, the Maya. Who has heard of these groups? Josh.
So, well, I obviously know Aztecs are in Mexico City. I assume that's pretty easy. The North American Indians are in North America. That's pretty obvious. I think the Inca, Maya, and Olmec are spread out across either Mexico or like South America. I don't really know.
Yeah, you're right. And then Sandra mentioned Peru for the Inca, thinking about the Incan civilization. Incan civilization in South America and their empire expanded. But yeah, based in Peru, places like Machu Picchu as one of their like great cities that they built. The Aztec were in central Mexico, but their empire spread out, and they have they're probably the most well-known group of these American civilizations, right? The Olmec are in southern Mexico, primarily in southern Mexico. The Maya would be southern Mexico and what would be considered today Central America. So places like El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, among other areas in Central America and Mexico. So these groups preceded the existence of like what we would call the modern nation state, like a place like Mexico, a place like Guatemala. Those boundaries are all established much later, right, than the existence of these groups. And then we even have groups in the Southwest that there's a group in Arizona, for instance, the Tono Arham people, who their traditional homelands actually cross the border. And so they have a very unique situation in regards to the lands that they claim and their ability to move back and forth with the building of the border wall, etc. But so for that first question, you'll talk about that. And then the second question, use the 2 videos we watched in week 2 about Columbus to answer the following question. Do you agree or disagree with the criticism that's applied to Columbus, and why? Especially in the second video, there is a group of activists of many of Native American background or indigenous background, but others who are not of Native American background, but that are highly critical of Columbus. So I'd like to see what you think in regards to the videos here. So that's kind of what's going on here at week 2. I hope that's, accessible for you. I hope you're not feeling like it's, too much work, so to speak, or too time consuming. So if you're having any trouble with the videos or questions, please just reach out and I'll be glad to discuss any concerns you have with you. Based off the week 2 module, the videos, the knowledge check, are there any questions that you have? And just one last thing before we move forward, that as you know, the textbook's integrated. I think it does a pretty good job of outlining the major developments taking place. And I want to talk just a little bit about that. And I definitely want to talk about the history essay with you also. We'll see if we have enough time to do all that, but. All right, so I'm going to stop share for just a second. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint that I had earlier, which was the one that I didn't think I was sharing at the time. Let's take a look here. Okay, so I just asked one of the questions I had for you all, like what's on your to-do list this week for our class. As you know, it's a knowledge check 2. Excuse me, the knowledge check 1. Getting ahead of myself. But is there anything else that you have going on this week that's like something you want to share with the class? I'll be heading out of town for the weekend. So if I don't reach you like real quickly, reply really quickly, just know that I might be somewhere that might not be internet, but I'll be back at the beginning of the week. So definitely be checking in with you all.
Go enjoy your vacation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, let's just talk a little bit about the themes, the major themes of the chapters that we're reading right now. And these are some of the themes that came to mind as I read the chapter. And I wanted to ask you all to write these themes down or note these themes. And I want to see what just comes to mind. So we're gonna try a little experiment here. Let's start with actually the second theme, colonization. And I want to try an exercise with you all. This is something that I'm kind of new to, but it's called a Jamboard. So if you've used Padlet at all, has anybody used Padlet in any of your other classes? It's kind of like a post-it note board.
I used it in Spanish. Is it the one where you can like upload a picture or an audio with yeah, I've used it.
Yeah, it's like a kind of like a big board where you can post notes and images, videos, links, etc. We're gonna use a tool similar to that. I think it's a little more basic, and I'm hoping that it works out for us. This is my first time using it with in a Zoom meeting, but I want to just use the theme of colonization. Let's use that because I have a Jamboard set up. So what I'd like you to do, let's take a few minutes, write down the term colonization or the theme of colonization. And what are some of the ideas, words, examples that come to mind as you write this theme down?
Will that be in the knowledge check? Not that I'm asking, I'm just curious.
This particular theme or question won't be in the knowledge check. It's kind of more just for reflection in regards to what we're reading about. It's definitely connected to some of the information that you're going to look at for the knowledge check, but it's not a specific question from the knowledge check. I think it relates right off the bat to Columbus, who is somebody you're going to, look at this week and talk about in your knowledge check for that second short answer question. But it can just be in general to your own previous knowledge, or to your knowledge of what we're reading about this week in chapter 2. So what I'd like you to do is take that term colonization, write it down, and you're gonna basically post a sticky note to share your thoughts. So I'm gonna give you, let's say, we'll take until about 3:05 to work and think about colonization. If you want to do a quick search, you're more than welcome to do that as well. At 3:05, I'll open up the Jamboard. I'll do it right now, actually, but I'll open it up and let's post on that Jamboard some of your ideas. After that, we'll take like a few minute break, come back to revisit the Jamboard, look at the essay prompt, and I think that'll probably be the majority of time we have left for the day. So let me share that with you. Where is my Jamboard? Let me jam on it real quick. Here we go. I'm going to send you the link in the chat. And That's how you can reach the Jamboard. And let me show you what you'll do. Oops, let me send this to everyone. So what you'll do is once you click on the link, it's going to take you to the Jamboard. And what you'll do is you're going to click sticky note here, and then you're going to type your thoughts. So let's just say, I just said Columbus as an example, right? So Columbus, and then you press save. And then your sticky note's going to be here. You can move it. I think the whole class can move your note. You can resize it, and you can change the color. So I like pink, so I'm going to go with pink. Move it here, make it small. All right, so I have a few of the classmates joining, I see. You should be able to click sticky note. Once you do that, let me know that it works, and hopefully we're all able to participate. All right. So here I put themes and ideas. What are some of the ideas? What are some of the terms, the examples that come to mind when you think about colonization? Because this is one of the big themes that really we'll be discussing for the next couple of chapters this week and next week. Let's take the next like 5 minutes to brainstorm, share, and we'll come back. You can also use the pen if that works for you. Whatever you, I think the sticky note is probably the easiest. I'm going to move this one here, and we have more than enough room. So, but the sticky note will be this little square here just in case. I hope that's not too loud. I'll just put on a little music to break up the silence real quick while we're working. All right, we got some great examples, and we'll just take a couple more minutes. I know there's still some classmates that are working, but I really appreciate you all sharing your ideas, and I think we can spark some conversation based off of those sticky notes that you have. Thank you to whoever's erasing that. I appreciate it. No worries. I know if you selected the pen and we're moving it around, it's all good.
Do I have to contribute writing this here for you?
Yeah, if you'd like. Did you have something you wanted to share, or do you want to wait until later?
Yeah, I try. Once I say something, you write it down here.
Yeah, so what you want to do is can you see my cursor?
Yes.
You'll select sticky note here, and then you're gonna type, whatever ideas you had relating to, or any ideas or thoughts about the term colonization. So we have a couple of different examples here. Once you type it, so let's just say as an example, I'm just gonna put your name, okay? You press save. It's gonna pop over here. You click on the sticky note, and then you can move it to here. You can, or if you'd like to tell me, I'd be glad to type it for you, whatever you prefer.
Okay.
What works best for you, Joshua?
Okay. Each immigrant countries have established boundaries during a very unique situation regarding to their differences in life.
All right, I have it right here. What color would you like to select? Do you have a preference?
Orange.
All right. Are we waiting on anyone else to add? Let me know if you need a couple more moments. I see some additional notes are coming through. Thank you all so much. Since we have all the notes here, instead of just taking a break right at this moment, let's go ahead and just continue. And then after we finish this exercise up, we'll take a few minutes. And then we'll, as I mentioned, we'll finish up with the history essay, and I'll talk about that. Does anyone want to share their sticky note and tell us what they were thinking about regarding that information? Let's start with Josh Scott.
So let me first.
Yeah, go for it.
If I can. All right, there you go. So I said, colonization reminds me of the colonist colonies, 13 states, patriots, Columbus, and taking over a certain piece of land and building a civilization on it. And that's like my own definition for it.
Definitely. And I mean, I think those are some of the things that I come to mind as well when I think about colonization, especially thinking about US history and the process of colonization here in the United States.
Like the 13 states, like this, like I forgot what it was, but it was like a snake and I was like cut up.
Yeah, the don't tread on me. You see that is taking on a new political meaning in the more modern era. But yeah, I mean, beginning with the 13 colonies, initially with the English settlement, we have the French settlements, we have New Amsterdam, New York. We have different colonial powers all vying for a presence here in the Americas. one of the earliest would be the Spanish. And so we have the example of the Spaniards in Mexico or in the Philippines, trading between Asia and Europe using the Silk Road. Those are some of the examples as well that kind of apply. I hope my audio is okay because I think my computer's like acting a little slow right now. So I hope it's not affecting the presentation too much. Okay, thank you, Josh, for sharing your example. Who else would like to talk a little bit about their sticky note and tell us what they were thinking in terms of this idea of colonization?
You're gonna have to start calling our names.
No, it's fine if you know you
I
Joshua.
would.
Joshua.
The reason I said that each immigrant countries have boundaries in their respective tribes in a unique situation is because they're trying to divide themselves from each other because of sometimes paranoia and mistrust, thinking that one tribe is the enemy to another, thinking that they're like mythical evil monsters trying to harm them when all they're just like them, trying to maintain their society of life until that kind of thing led them to being, extinct.
So you would say as a matter of the notion of survival, the belief
Yeah,
that.
you could probably say that.
And are you thinking more in the like earlier historical era, like with the groups that we mentioned earlier, like the Aztec and the Inca, or are you thinking
Yeah,
about?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have the story of the Aztecs is pretty fascinating just because of their arrival. They're small in numbers and they grow their civilization pretty rapidly in comparison to some other groups. So you can take a look at the kind of the origins of these various groups and try to make sense of how they came to be where they were and how they climbed, and expanded their empire. A group like the Aztecs is a great group to look at to see some of the facets of how that kind of unfolds. And the response to that would be to try to not be kind of swallowed up by a powerful group that has grown and grown and grown. But with the question of colonization, now we have a new layer that adds to that discussion with the arrival of European explorers in the Americas. Would anybody else like to expand on their sticky note? I think there's some interesting ideas.
I think conversion is a big one, especially when the colonists just sit in, because they were used to Christianity and whatever they were familiar to in the old world. And when they come to the new world, they face a lot of new gods varying from community to community. So they obviously try to repress that. And there was definitely a lot of conflict between that probably. So I think it's really interesting, the aspect of conversion.
Thank you, Isaac. I appreciate that example. Yeah, I mean, I think just in a general sense, talking about, I'll use two groups as an example, the English and the Spanish. The Spanish they have a history of conversion even before they arrive in the Americas with the history of Islam in Spain and in Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. The Moors ruled in Spain, what we know today as Spain and Portugal, for 700 years. In 1492, we have an event that's called La Reconquista, where two royal families kind of unite and emerge and are able to take back Spain and make it Catholic again, Catholic king and queen. And in that process, they're forcing people to either convert to Catholicism or to leave or to face punishment. And there's really, as you mentioned, Isaac, there's this kind of transfer of that conversion to here. Now, the way that plays out over centuries is very different, I think, in the sense that there has to be some adaptation as well. There is a forced conversion of Catholicism to the native peoples in the Americas, especially in a place like Mexico. But there also has to be some understanding that they're going to maintain some of their own beliefs and practices. So there is, in some respects and in some places, more of a, not a total merging, but definitely it's not what you would see back in Spain, so to speak. So, but there is that conversion. And in the English case, some would argue that there isn't as much of a focus on conversion. There is conversion that takes place, but not to the degree that it takes place in Spain. There's not the intermixing to the degree. So you may be familiar with the term mestizo, which is the idea that the indigenous and European create the mestizo population, which is a mix of both of these groups. There's a lot of criticism of the term and how it's used, but yeah, I think that's a great example of this notion of conversion. And I'd like you all to consider how that the religious component, because that's one of the themes that's talked about in the chapter, right? The Catholic religion, the Protestant Reformation, the Puritans arriving, in on the East Coast, with the early settlers in the American colonies. So there's all these different views on religion, and they're really forcing these various groups to splinter, to leave, to convert. Some are very popular, like the Protestant Reformation, which takes over England. And that in effect has influence in what happens in the Americas. So those are great examples. And sorry if I'm just, all these examples are leading me to more ideas. So I think you guys have had some great sticky notes here. Let's hear one last one, someone that wouldn't mind just discussing their sticky note, and then we'll take a little break. Can I ask, let's see. I saw conversion. Who wrote taking over or influencing one's culture? Would you mind talking a little bit about that, if that was your sticky note? Like, what was your, let's see. Oh, was it Anthony? Were you the one who shared it? Oh, okay. Thank you, Anthony. Anthony's mic is not working, so we're gonna see if someone else will add one more. Let's see. I'm gonna select one because I think there was another one that was helpful as well. British Empire over North America, parts of Africa and India. And this is a great example as well. Who wrote that sticky note? British Empire over North America, parts of Africa and India. And I think just to add to that example, it's a good example because oftentimes we're talking about US history, but it is global history, this colonization that takes place. If you fast forward into thinking about American colonization in a place like Hawaii and the Philippines and other areas where the US has presence, there's, at one point, this huge empire as well. And there was a saying that the sun never sat on the American empire because of the colonial presence throughout the world. So you could be in one place and the sun would be up. And if you went to another American colonial holding, then the sun would still be up, 24 hours a day, just because of that presence on a global scale. But thank you all for sharing with the Jamboard. I think it was pretty good, a good run that we had with it, and I was glad you were able to participate. It's 3:20 p.m. Let's regroup at like 3:27, 3:28, 3:26, whatever you like. Come back around that time. We'll wrap it up with the history essay prompt and conclude for the day. All right. Thank you all.
Sounds good.
All right. As I get started here, can you all hear me and can I hear you?
Loud
Okay.
and clear as an amplifier on a music summer festival.
Nice. That's pretty loud, right? Thank you all. We took a look at this prompt last week and I was hoping to have it all ready for you after that meeting, but I had to add some more information and just update the dates for the due dates, etc. And so everything is here is listed. I want to share it with you first, but I will be posting it to our Canvas course, to the history essay module. I already posted a few different resources there for you to check out, and I'll also go over those with you before we conclude for today. Last week we looked at it, so I'm not going to go section by section, but what I did add was a description of what the annotated bibliography is, what the citations is, because you have a number of different steps you're taking as you continue working, or start first selecting your topic, then moving on to the annotated bibliography, then essay citations, and then your draft, and then the second draft, and that would be the conclusion of the assignment. I also wanted to add, there are some essay requirements here that you'll want to follow. Take a look at that when you get a moment, regarding the sources, regarding the format. Now, you do have an option for an alternative format. These would be, there's 3 that I have listed here. If you have an idea about one that you think is applicable, reach out to me and we can talk about it. But the first is a narrated PowerPoint presentation. So what you'll do is you'll create a PowerPoint presentation and you'll need to record yourself giving a overview of the slides that you've created. You'll include images, you'll include text, and I have a minimum of 25 slides if that's something you're interested in. You can also do just a video presentation. So I'm not sure if any of you are on YouTube or doing anything along those lines. I had a couple of students previously who who were doing that. So they opted to create videos of something they were comfortable with. You can also do that. Now, if you don't want to do either of those, you can do an audio podcast. So it would just be strictly audio. If you do decide to do an alternative format, please let me know by week 5 so that I know who's doing what. You're still going to need to take the steps that the essay writers will take, where you will create an annotated bibliography, you will submit that essay citation assignment, you will submit like an initial draft of your presentation. So it doesn't have to be complete, but it does need to show some work, and then the final draft. All right. So, we want to make sure that you're almost matching the work that would be done writing an essay, but some folks like to learn and express themselves in other ways beyond just writing an essay assignment. So I wanted to try to encapsulate that and give you an opportunity for alternatives if you're interested. If you're interested in an alternative option, as I said, just let me know by week 5, please. Is anybody considering that? Yeah, so we have, hopefully we have some interest, and I think that's one way that you can meet the requirements of the class, but in a different format. I do have a couple of examples from last semester that I'll share with you as well, so you can get an idea of what I thought were pretty successful presentations, and I'll put those in our history essay prompt, or excuse me, history essay module as well for the class. Okay, so you took a look at the prompt. I'm going to stop sharing the prompt and I'm going to share our module with the class. So there's a couple of different sections that we have for the history essay module. And when you get an opportunity, please take a look at each of the pages. One that I want to share with you right now that I have your attention and your time is the History Research Guide website from our Southwestern College Library. This is a pretty cool website research guide that our librarians have put together for us, and it focuses solely on history, so that's super helpful. Some instructors even have them built for their classes, but I think this is a great start, and it focuses on a lot of the things that we'll be discussing. If you need direct help, you can actually reach out to a librarian. You can type your name here, and you can put your email address and say, I need help with citations. And then you start the chat. So that's one great option for you. And let me try to erase that before I share it. You can also request an appointment with a one-on-one Zoom meeting with a librarian. That's pretty cool as well. So I think that's a great resource we have available. And I'm in the process of scheduling a meeting for one of the librarians to come and talk to our course at one of the weekly Zoom meetings that we have. So I'll keep you up to date on that once I get a finalized date. So beginning your research. This is going to tell you about some of the differences between the library resources and searching on Google. Now, this talks a little bit about how to actually begin the process. And one of the areas that you're going to look at is primary and secondary sources. You read a little bit about primary and secondary sources in our week 1 module. And this talks a little bit about some of the different options for finding primary and secondary sources. There's also a way for you to evaluate information. It's called the CRAP test. And so there's this infographic here that talks a little bit about the steps that you can take when you're evaluating a source. Now let's go back to the home page, and I think there's one more thing I wanted to share with you all. Oh, this is also a really helpful tool, which is the history research by era or geography. For our class, what would be, there's a couple here that could apply. Which would be the ones that you might select for our class?
Mexico history and then U.S. history before 1877.
Yeah, those are going to be great. Say you could presumably, even though it's U.S. history, you could look at Mexican history. You could look at the Aztecs as some of the groups that you might be interested in talking about. U.S. history before 1877 is going to be a great resource. And you could also check California history as well, right? So we could take a look, say we want to talk about California Indians and the history of California Indians. We could take a look at this ebook as an option. If we wanted to research the gold rush, 1849, we could take a look at this ebook here. So these are some good options here. These are all databases that you can use to search for journal articles, other useful sources of information. Generally, let me back up real quick, because you all are college students. Who has had experience with journal articles? If you've had experience with journal articles, let me know yes or no in the chat. Have you used journal articles in your college career? At least the first initial responses are no. You know what? It is a little difficult to use the journal articles because generally they're written for a particular audience. Like usually it's historians writing for historians. So it might be difficult to use some of those articles. What you can do is these are going to be more for primary sources, but let's just take a look here real quick and see what we can find. I'm going to stop share so I can log in real quick. This is the one with the shot. You want that one? Without it? Okay. Bye. Thank you so much. All right, let's go ahead and share my screen. This is EBSCOhost, which is a database that has a whole bunch of different journal articles, books, etc. Let's just say, I don't know, let's just say the gold rush and see what happens. Okay, so there's a couple of important things to consider as you're looking here. What you want to do right off the bat, if you're going to use EBSCOhost or any database search, put limit to full text, because some of these sources are going to be sources you have to find somewhere else, not online. So we don't want to use those sources, right? Let's go to full text. And let's just say we want to take a look at this, photographing the California Gold Rush. Luckily, my computer is working at a pretty good pace here. So if you were researching the gold rush, you could use this article as one of your sources. And this includes, so this is a tricky one because it's actually a secondary source. It's someone that's writing about the history of photography and photographing the gold rush. So it's not a firsthand account. It's somebody writing about it, but the pictures themselves are primary sources. So this one's a little tricky, but look at, I mean, this is a great image here that we could use. This is a fantasy image of 1858. So this is a little bit after the gold rush, but it's still an awesome image, right? So what I would suggest is, as you're thinking about your topic, just start browsing around. Some of these articles are going to be pretty easy to use. They're going to be accessible. Others are going to be written, like I mentioned, for other academics. So it may be so specific that it may not be as helpful, but this is one option you have as you start to like browse around for information on your topic. All right, so I'm going to stop share. I'm going to go back to the module and we're going to get ready just to kind of wrap things up here. Oops. Because I just want to show you one last thing and then we'll see if anyone has any final comments or questions. Are you able to see the module view right now?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's see. So I did the first, after you choose the essay topic, the first or the next thing that you'll do, I should say, is the annotated bibliography. So I shared a couple of these annotated bibliographies. These are there's one that's, I believe they're both student samples actually. But what this includes is a citation of the source. So if you've done a works cited page, you're already halfway there. You already know that part of the process. And then the second part is a brief like summarization of the article, like what it's about, how, and then at the end, I asked the class to say, or tell me a little bit about how it's helpful for your essay. So this student said, I could use this source in my essay to give background information on the roles African Americans played during the Civil War and what was going on at the time regarding the inequalities and unfair treatment they had faced. So that gives me an indication of what the student had in mind as they selected this source. The last thing I'll mention about the annotated bibliographies is if you choose, I think I asked you to include 1, 2, 3, 4, I think like 5 or 6 sources. I can't remember off the top of my head how many I asked you to include, but you can always change them. So it doesn't, so say you found good sources now and later on you found a better source, you can always swap them out. You can always change them. You're always working and filtering through the information. So I expect that you're going to run into some more useful information as you continue the research process. So when you get a moment, you have, of course, you have plenty of time throughout the semester, but as the weeks go by, we're meeting those various deadlines. So I want to make sure you have some information that you can reference, especially with the samples. The only one I haven't updated is the sample student essay citations, which I will be updating shortly. I do have a couple of examples, and I just need to edit them before I upload them. But this is a good start here. Also, there's a couple of videos here that talk about how to write an annotated bibliography. And this is one from Smart Student. She's a YouTuber that does a lot of different videos. And I thought she did a good job really explaining, kind of breaking down what the annotated bib is. She talks about it in an APA format, but it's still pretty MLA and APA, not a huge difference. And if you need to use APA, that's fine. But generally, we're using MLA in the course, but there's no specific written rule that it has to be MLA. So if you're a psychology major or a major that uses APA, you're welcome to use that. What are your questions? What are your ideas, thoughts about the history essay at this time? Or are you, I know you have to think about your topic, so that's going to be for next week. We're thinking about the topic.
So, real quick reminder question, but so by next week, we should have read chapter 1 and 2 in our textbook and do the let it know or what you know.
Yeah, so by the end of this week, we're finishing up chapter 2. And by Tuesday, we're finishing up the knowledge check. Next week, we'll have another discussion assignment. And we'll have, you'll be asked to submit your topic. It doesn't need to be like by Sunday. It's not like a hard deadline for the essay topic. So if you're still debating by Monday or Tuesday, that's no problem. But I'd like you to definitely wrap it up so that's week 3, by week 4, because then you have the next step in the process. And we have flexibility with the deadlines for these various steps. So let's say they're soft deadlines, but I don't say, if I'm asking you to complete this by week 6 and by week 8 you still haven't submitted anything to me, then by then it's just, we want to try to get as close as possible. A few days isn't going to be a deal breaker at all, but a week or 2 week passes by, then it gets a little bit more challenging, simply due to the fact that I want to have you go through these steps in the hopes that it's starting to all click and you're developing and building towards creating that draft of the essay.
Biden, thank you.
You're welcome. And I think each of those activities, like the annotated bibliography and the essay citations, those you can use really to write the essay, and there's steps that you're going to take anyways, but you're actually getting points for that. So I hope that's like a motivator a little bit.
Okay, thanks. That's
no problem.
Very helpful.
No problem. Now, just as a disclaimer, if we start getting like backed up and you're like, oh, I got a discussion and then I got this and then I got that, we'll work something out to where you're able to maintain your schedule. If the class is feeling that way, we'll modify and do whatever we do. But as long as everybody's working, and with the meetings, I think that's helpful. We should be in great shape. And of course, whatever suggestions you have, I want to take those into consideration as well. So just to conclude, when you get a moment, take a look at the history essay module. You'll have some time this week, and then thinking about the topic next week. If you need a refresher on this week's module, week 2, go to the announcements, and there's that video I posted there. I'll put it in the module as well so you can find it easily. If you don't need the refresher, I'll probably upload this video hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, if not sooner, because I want to get it up before the weekend. So if you need to come back and revisit it, you can do so. Does anyone have any final questions, comments, concerns? All right, everybody. We did pretty good. We stuck to the script. I'm hoping for the next upcoming Zoom meetings, I can give you like a basic kind of outline of what we're going to do, and maybe give you a couple of like the questions that we were going to go over today, which we didn't go into detail, but something along those lines. And you can prep a little bit. I don't want to make it overwhelming, but I definitely want to engage you all. So thank you for your time today. And if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. You all have a good weekend.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you, Professor.
Enjoy your
Thank you.
holiday weekend. All right.
You
We'll see you all
too.
next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.